There's something about the silence of an old house, not the kind of silence you get in a quiet neighborhood or a still, empty room. No, I'm talking about the kind of silence that feels like it's watching you, the kind that presses down on your ears and makes you suddenly aware of every little creak, every faint shuffle, every tick of the clock. It's a silence that isn't empty, it's full. Elara Veras wasn't afraid of silence. At least she didn't think she was. She was looking for it, actually, chasing it like it was something she could catch. City life had been too loud. Sirens at 3 a.m., neighbors fighting through thin apartment walls, the constant hum of traffic like a never-ending heartbeat. She couldn't escape. She told herself she needed to get away. Somewhere quiet, she'd said. I just need to hear myself think. So, when she found the house on Briar Hollow Road, it seemed like a blessing. A little two-story home tucked away from the world, with nothing but trees and fog for miles. A fresh start, no noise, no people. But as she would soon learn, sometimes the things you run away from have a way of following you. And sometimes the quiet you seek isn't really quiet at all. The drive to the house took longer than she expected. The roads grew narrower with every mile until they were little more than dirt paths framed by towering pines. The kind of road where, if you saw someone walking, you'd wonder how they got there and where they were going. Her old hatchback rattled over loose stones, the tires crunching the dirt with a steady rhythm. She gripped the steering wheel tight, leaning forward like it would help her see through the fog. It moved in slow, lazy drifts across the road, curling like smoke from an unseen fire. Her GPS had stopped working 20 minutes ago. No signal. She glanced at her phone, tapping the screen like that would help, but it stayed stubbornly blank. Of course, she muttered, tossing it onto the passenger seat. The fog got thicker. Trees crowded closer. No street signs, no mile markers, just the long stretch of road and the steady crunch of gravel beneath her tires. Briar Hollow Road, she said aloud, repeating the name as if that would make it feel more real. She almost missed the turn. Her headlights swept across an old, crooked wooden sign, barely hanging from a rusted chain. Briar Hollow RD. The words were faded, the paint chipped away by years of rain and wind. She slammed on the brakes and reversed, her tires skidding slightly on the loose gravel. Okay, she breathed, turning onto the narrow road. It felt different. The road here was rougher, lined with thick roots that poked out from the dirt like knuckles. The trees here were older, thicker, their bark blackened as if charred. Her headlights barely seemed to cut through the fog now, and every shadow cast by the trees seemed too long, too sharp. When she finally saw the house, it was like it had been waiting for her. It sat at the end of the path, crouched low, like it didn't want to be seen. Its roof sagged in the middle, its windows dark and hollow. Vines crept up its walls like fingers, their tendrils twisting around the porch posts. The front steps were cracked, one of them slightly sunken. A crooked house, that's what her grandmother would have called it. But it was hers. She parked the car, cut the engine, and sat for a moment staring at it. The fog curled around it like it was alive, moving in slow, swirling patterns. She swore she could see it drifting in through the cracks around the window frames. "Home, sweet home," she muttered, popping the door open. The air hit her like a splash of cold water. It smelled like wet dirt and something older, a smell she couldn't name. Ancient air, she thought, the kind of air you only get in places that have been forgotten. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she made her way to the porch. The steps groaned as she climbed them, each creak sharp and sudden in the still air. She stopped at the front door, turning to look behind her. The fog was thicker now, curling through the trees like fingers reaching for something just out of reach. "No one's here," she reminded herself. "No one but me." The key turned with a satisfying click, and she pushed the door open. The first thing she noticed was the cold. It wasn't the kind of cold that comes from the weather. It was the kind of cold that felt like it was coming from the walls. It clung to her arms, her face, the back of her neck. It smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, like old coins. Her breath fogged in front of her face. "Guess I'm buying a space heater," she muttered, flicking on the light switch. The bulb above her flickered once, twice, then held steady. The room filled with a dim, yellow glow. Old furniture was still here. An armchair with frayed edges, a coffee table with water rings staining the wood, shelves lined with old books whose spines had gone soft from humidity. Elara rubbed her arms, trying to warm herself. Her footsteps echoed as she moved through the house. The floors were wood, smooth but weathered. Every step made a hollow, resonant thud, thud, thud. She noticed the sound right away. Deeper than she expected, like there was more space beneath the floor than there should have been. Her boots hit a particularly loose board, and she stopped. It gave slightly under her weight. Not much, but enough for her to feel it shift. She stepped off it and crouched down, tapping it with her fingers. Hollow. "Cellar?" she muttered, glancing around. She hadn't seen any sign of a basement door. A small chill ran up her spine, and she rubbed her arms again. "Stop it," she thought. "Don't freak yourself out. It's just an old house." She moved on. She brought in her bags, made a cup of tea, and sat at the small kitchen table, watching the fog roll in through the window. The quiet wrapped around her like a blanket. No cars, no neighbors yelling, no blaring horns. Finally, she thought, letting out a long breath. Finally, some peace. But peace doesn't last in places like this. The fog pressed against the window. It moved slowly, unnervingly slow. Her gaze flicked toward it, her eyes narrowing. No, it's just fog. Just fog. But something about the way it moved, too smooth, too deliberate, set her on edge. Later that night, after she had unpacked most of her clothes and made her bed, she lay down in the dark, letting the quiet hum of the night lull her to sleep. That's when she heard it. It was faint at first, just a shuffle, a faint, scratching shuffle coming from the floorboards beneath her bed. She sat up slowly, holding her breath. It stopped. Her heart pounded in her chest as she leaned forward, straining her ears. Just the house settling, she thought, just the house. But as she lay back down, she heard it again. Shuffle, scratch, pause. Her breath came in shallow, shaky bursts. Then she heard it, soft, so soft she barely caught it. "Elaraaa!" Her eyes shot open, her heart thundering in her chest. She didn't move, she didn't breathe. She just lay there, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. And from beneath the floorboards, something knocked. Elara didn't sleep that night. She lay stiff as a board, eyes locked on the ceiling, every muscle tense. Her heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of her chest. Her ears strained to catch even the smallest sound. But the house was still now. No more shuffling, no more scratching, no more whispers. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the fog outside, she exhaled a long, shaky breath. It felt like she'd been holding it in all night. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. "Old house noises," she muttered aloud as she sat on the edge of the bed, her hands rubbing her face. Her voice was hoarse, dry from hours of breathing through her mouth. Wood creaks, pipes shift, it's normal, that's all it is. But she knew. Oh, she knew. It wasn't the wood, it wasn't the pipes. It was something else. She walked barefoot to the kitchen, her feet sticking slightly to the cold, damp floor. The air still smelled strange, metallic, sharp. She opened the windows to let in some fresh air, but the fog outside just pressed closer, curling in like it was trying to come inside. She turned away, rubbing her arms. Her phone had service again, at least. 5 missed texts from her sister, asking how the move was going. Elara typed out a quick reply. "House is old, but I'm fine, just needs a little cleaning." She left out the part about the whispers. The rest of the morning was spent unpacking, cleaning, and convincing herself she wasn't scared. She played music from her phone as loud as it would go, letting the rhythm fill every inch of the house. She needed sound. Noise was safer than silence. When she passed the spot in the bedroom where she'd heard the first knock, she glanced down at the floorboards. Her eyes lingered on the wood, on the tiny gaps between the planks, just wide enough for something small to slip through. "Just the house," she said again, louder this time. "Just the house." Her voice echoed back to her. It was around midnight when she heard it again. She had fallen asleep on the couch this time, the TV still on, low volume, playing an old sitcom she wasn't really watching. The soft glow of the screen flickered, casting faint blue light across the room. She woke up suddenly. No nightmare, no loud noise, just awake. The house was quiet, too quiet. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. Her gaze flicked to the TV, still playing, still glowing. Then she heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Her heart stopped. She knew that sound. It wasn't the creak of old wood, it was footsteps. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. She turned her head slowly, eyes wide, looking toward the hallway. It was dark, pitch black, the kind of dark that swallows the edges of things. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps moved slowly, methodically, from one end of the hall to the other, back and forth, back and forth. Her hands gripped the edge of the couch cushion, her fingers digging in so hard, her knuckles went white. "No one else is here," she thought. "No one is here but me." Her mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Could it be an animal? A raccoon, maybe? A stray cat? But these steps, they were too heavy. Not scurrying, not darting, walking, deliberate. And then they stopped. Silence. Elara sat frozen, her eyes locked on the black mouth of the hallway. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. "Please go away, please go away." Then, from the darkness of the hallway, a soft sound broke the stillness. "Elara!" She bolted off the couch, knocking the coffee table with her leg. Her foot caught on the edge, and she stumbled, falling hard on her hands and knees. Her head snapped toward the hallway, her heart thundering in her chest so loud it hurt. "Who's there?" she screamed, her voice cracking. Nothing, only the dark. But something in that dark moved. She didn't wait to see it. She ran straight to her bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her. She pressed her back against it, breathing in short, wild gasps. Her hands were shaking so badly she could hardly grip the lock, but she managed to turn it with a soft click. "It's not real," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real." But when she heard the knock on the other side of the door, 3 slow, heavy knocks, she stopped breathing altogether. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, her back still pressed against the door. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, looking for something, anything. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock it. But when she looked at the screen, her breath caught in her throat. There was already a message there, a single message. It wasn't from her sister, it wasn't from anyone in her contacts. The sender was just listed as unknown. The message said, "We can see you." The phone slipped from her hands. She didn't pick it up. Elara didn't leave her room for 2 days. Her food ran out. Her water bottles were empty, but she didn't care. She sat on the edge of her bed, facing the door, never looking away from it. She didn't sleep. Every so often she would hear it, a shuffle from the floor, a soft tap, tap, tap from under the bed, and of course, the whisper, "Elara!" Her nails had bitten into her palms so hard her skin had broken, blood dried in thin, dark lines along the creases of her hands, but she didn't care. Her body was failing, but her mind was too busy trying to stay alive. Her reflection in the window looked wrong. It stared back at her, its head tilted just a little too far to the side. It wasn't her. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it wasn't her. She felt something shift in the mattress beneath her. Just a soft push, like someone pressing up from below. Her eyes went wide. Her breath stopped. She slowly leaned forward, moving as quietly as possible, her eyes locked on the bed. Press. There it was again. Her body tensed, her eyes wild, her mind begging her to move, but her muscles frozen in terror. The mattress shifted slightly upward, like someone was lying underneath, pressing up with both hands. She didn't scream. She didn't move. And then, from directly beneath her, she heard it clear as day. Knock, knock, knock. Her mind broke. Tears poured down her face. Her lips trembled. "Leave me alone," she whimpered, rocking back and forth, hands on the sides of her head. "Please leave me alone." The knock stopped, but the whispers didn't. Elara didn't sleep. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale, lips dry and cracked. 3 days with no sleep will do that to you. Her body was shutting down, but she didn't care. She couldn't risk it. She knew that if she closed her eyes for too long, they would come closer. The house was quieter than ever, but that only made it worse. Her ears picked up every sound, every groan of the wood, every shift of the wind outside, every faint creak from the walls. They're in the walls now, she thought. They're everywhere. She sat on the edge of her bed, knees pulled to her chest, her back pressed against the cold wall. Her phone was dead, its battery long gone, but it didn't matter. The phone hadn't helped her before. It only made it worse. Her eyes darted toward the closet. The door was closed. It had been closed for days, but she swore she'd seen it move. Just a little. A tiny shift, like someone slowly, carefully pulling it open an inch at a time. Her gaze flicked to the window. The fog was still out there. It never went away. Thick and heavy, like it was leaning against the glass, pressing in. Sometimes she swore she saw shapes moving in it. Not people, shapes. Things that didn't walk right. Her hands shook. She rubbed them against her arms to try and stop it, but nothing helped. "I'm losing it," she thought. "This house is breaking me." Tap, tap, tap. Her breath hitched. Her head snapped toward the floor. The taps were coming from directly beneath her feet. Not under the bed, not across the room, right under her. Her chest tightened as her heart beat too fast. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, loud and wild. She didn't move. She didn't dare. Her eyes darted down toward the floorboards, her breath shallow and uneven. She watched them like she expected something to push through the wood. The taps stopped, but a moment later, something worse replaced them. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Her whole body seized with terror. Not this, not this, not now. The scratching moved slowly, dragging along the underside of the boards. She imagined something long and sharp scraping against the wood. It moved in a straight line from one side of the room to the other, slow, purposeful, like it knew she was listening. Her eyes squeezed shut. She covered her ears. But even then, she heard it. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. The sound was everywhere. It wasn't just under the floor anymore. It was behind the walls. It was above the ceiling. "It's circling me," she thought. "It's circling me." Her eyes darted to the closet. She didn't want to look at it. She didn't want to see, but she saw. The door was open, just an inch. Her heart stopped. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The darkness inside the closet was different now. It wasn't just shadows. It was thicker, like ink spilling out into the air. For a moment, she thought she saw something in there, 2 tiny pinpricks of light, 2 eyes. She slammed her eyes shut, pressing her back harder against the wall. "Go away," she whispered. Tears streamed down her face. "Please, just go away." The scratching stopped. Tap, tap, tap. 3 taps, hard, sharp. They came from inside the closet door. Her breath came out as a sob, her body racked with trembling shudders. She slid off the bed slowly, her back still against the wall, her eyes never leaving the closet. She moved like she was balancing on a tightrope, every breath shallow and deliberate. Her knees shook. Her heart felt like it was going to tear itself apart. The fog outside the window grew thicker. Her breath fogged up in front of her face. Her eyes flicked toward the bed. She could hear it again. Shuffle, shift, pause. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. She reached the door to the hallway. Her fingers fumbled for the lock, but they were too slick with sweat. She twisted it. Click. She opened the door. The hallway was dark, but it wasn't empty. At the far end, something stood there, a shape, humanoid. Its arms were too long, its head tilted to one side, like a broken doll that had been left to hang. She blinked, her breath frozen in her chest. The figure didn't move. Neither did she. Her mind begged her to close the door. Close it, close it, close it now. But she couldn't. Her eyes wouldn't stop staring at it. Her lungs wouldn't take in air. It was too still, too wrong. Then it took a step. Her eyes flew wide. Another step. It was moving toward her, slowly. Each step slow, deliberate, its feet making soft tap, tap, tap sounds as it walked. Her body jolted into action. She yanked the door shut and threw the lock, her hands scrambling to secure it. She pressed her back against the door, her chest heaving. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her hands against her mouth, trying not to scream. Knock, knock, knock. Her eyes squeezed shut. Knock, knock, knock. It was on the other side. Her whole body shook with quiet sobs. Her breathing was too loud, but she couldn't stop it. Her eyes darted toward the closet door. Still open. Just an inch. Just an inch. The knock stopped. But then... Elara... The voice was right next to her ear. Her scream tore through the house. The following days were a blur. She didn't sleep, didn't eat. Her mind was in survival mode now, every second a desperate attempt to stay aware, to stay alert. She stayed in the living room, keeping her back against the wall, her eyes flicking toward every door, every window, every crack in the floor. The whispers didn't stop, neither did the knocks. They didn't come every night now. They came whenever they wanted. Morning, noon, night. Didn't matter. She moved her mattress to the middle of the living room, far from the closet, far from the hallway, far from the windows. But it didn't matter. She still heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Sometimes she'd look at her reflection in the window and swear it wasn't moving with her. She'd tilt her head and her reflection would stare back, still as stone. Her nails were cracked and bleeding. Her lips chapped from chewing them in her panic. Her body was breaking down. I have to leave. I have to leave. But every time she moved toward the front door, she heard the footsteps. Right behind her. Her phone was dead. No calls, no signal. No one was coming for her. She knew that now. One night, as she lay on the mattress, exhausted, numb, her eyes half open, she felt it. The mattress shifted. Her whole body went rigid. Her breath caught in her throat. No, no, not now. Please, not now. But it shifted again. Something was pushing up from below, slowly, gently, the way someone might push their fingertips through soft fabric. Her heart stopped. She rolled off the mattress in one wild motion, falling hard on the floor. Her eyes locked on the bed. Her breathing was shallow and fast, her mouth open in terror. She watched as the mattress bulged upward, a soft bump rising from below, like something was crawling under the fabric. Then, from beneath the mattress, she heard a whisper so clear it might as well have been in her ear. "Come down, Elara." Elara sat on the cold floor, eyes locked on the mattress in front of her. Her breath came in short, fast gasps, her chest rising and falling like a rabbit cornered by a fox. She stared at the shape moving under the mattress. It was subtle at first, a slow rising bulge, like something was pressing up from beneath. Fingers, she thought. Those are fingers. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked, her whole body frozen with terror. "Get out," she croaked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Her eyes burned with tears, her nails digging into her palms. "Please, get out." The bulge pressed higher, lifting the fabric. It wasn't fingers, it was a hand, a human hand pressing up from below, the outline of fingers so clear she could see every joint. Her scream came out as a strangled sob. The hand pressed harder, slowly pushing upward until the mattress began to lift off the ground. She scrambled back, her legs kicking, feet slipping on the cold wood. She didn't blink, couldn't blink. If she blinked, it would move. She knew it would. The hand slowly sank back down beneath the mattress. Her heart thundered in her chest. Run, just run, get out of the house, run, run, run. But she couldn't move. She was pinned there, frozen with terror, her back pressed against the wall like she was trying to melt into it. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. Her breathing was shallow and sharp. Then she heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The taps echoed from under the floorboards again, louder this time. Not distant like before, close, right beneath her, right under her. Her eyes darted to the bedroom door. She had locked it. She knew she had, but her gaze lingered on the doorknob. It was turning. The silver knob slowly twisted to the side, jerking in short, sharp motions like someone was impatient. It jiggled once, twice, and then it stopped. Her breath caught in her chest. Her eyes stayed locked on the knob, waiting. Her pulse thudded in her ears like a war drum. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks on the door. Heavy, deliberate. Her breath came out in shallow bursts. "Elaraaa!" The voice drifted from the other side of the door, soft but clear, like someone whispering directly into her ear. Her eyes squeezed shut, her face twisting in fear. Her tears ran hot down her cheeks. "Leave me alone," she whimpered. "Please, please leave me alone." Knock, knock, knock. The knocks didn't stop this time. They came again, louder. Then she heard something worse. The lock turned. The soft click echoed like a thunderclap in her mind. She jolted upright, heart racing, her whole body pulsing with raw panic. "No, no, 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 no!" She lunged forward and grabbed the doorknob, twisting it back, trying to relock it, but it wouldn't turn. Her eyes flicked down. Her breath hitched. Her hand was on the knob, but so was another hand. Pale fingers wrapped over hers, pressing them into the cold metal. She felt it, cold, clammy, thin like bones. It squeezed her hand with a slow, crushing pressure. Her scream finally broke free. She yanked her hand away so hard she fell backward, landing on her back with a loud thud. Her head hit the floor, her vision spinning. The door creaked open inch by inch, slower than anything she'd ever seen. Her breathing came in frantic, gasping sobs. She scrambled backward, crab-walking on her hands and feet, until her back hit the bed frame. Her head whipped from side to side, looking for a weapon. Anything. Her eyes landed on the lamp. She snatched it off the nightstand, gripping it like a club. The door opened all the way, but there was nothing there. The hallway beyond was a tunnel of darkness. Her eyes darted left, then right, her breath caught in her chest. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. "Please don't, please don't." Then, from the hall, something stepped forward. It was slow, 1 foot at a time, bare feet on wood. She heard each step. Her whole body tensed with each one. Tap, tap, tap. The figure emerged from the blackness. It was shaped like a man, but it was too tall. Its head was tilted to the side, its neck at an unnatural angle, like it had been broken and never healed. Its eyes were small, sunken hollows of darkness. It didn't have a mouth, but she heard it speak. "Come down, Elara." Her whole body moved on instinct. She threw the lamp as hard as she could. It smashed into the figure's face with a loud crash, and it staggered back into the hall. She didn't wait. She ran, bare feet slapped against the wood. Her breathing was wild, frantic, her heart slamming against her chest. She ran for the front door, the old stairs creaking so loud it sounded like thunder beneath her. She reached for the lock, her fingers slipping against it, but it was stuck. It won't turn. No, 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 she sobbed, twisting it with all her strength. She pulled at the door, yanking it so hard her fingers burned. Please. Then from behind her she heard them, the whispers. But it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many voices. Come down, Elara. We're waiting. She spun around, eyes wild, and that's when she saw them. The floor was moving. The floorboards were shifting, rising slowly like something was pushing them from below. The gaps between the planks widened, and thin, pale fingers slipped through. Dozens of them, crawling, clawing, reaching. The boards creaked and cracked as more fingers pushed through. Her eyes filled with terror. No, 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 no. Hands, pale hands, human hands, dozens of them, too many. They crawled over each other, fingers writhing like insects, pushing the boards up higher. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts as she backed away, eyes locked on the sea of writhing hands below her. Her back hit the wall. She glanced left, glanced right. The fingers were everywhere. Come down, Elaraaa. The voices came from below. Her eyes darted to the large, loose floorboard beneath the kitchen table. It was shifting, tilting upward. Something was lifting it. Her breath caught in her throat. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. The floorboard snapped. A face rose from beneath it. Not a human face. It was pale, wet, smooth as porcelain but warped like melting wax. Hollow eyes, too wide, stared straight at her. She screamed so loud her throat tore. Her knees buckled and she fell. Hands were on her ankles. She felt them. Cold, hard fingers gripping her skin, pulling her down. Her nails scraped against the wood, clawing for something to hold on to. The face tilted toward her, eyes staring into hers. Its mouth finally opened, a wide, black hole of nothing. It spoke with all the voices at once. Come down, Elara. Her screams echoed in the house long after she disappeared. The fog rolled in through the broken window, curling over the empty room. The door swung open, creaking softly in the still air. Then slowly, the floorboards shifted back into place. No hands, no cracks, just wood. The house went still. The whispers went silent. But silence, as you know, is never really silent. Not here. The house was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that waits. The air felt thicker, heavier, like it had weight. Every sound, every creak echoed longer than it should, like something was listening from deep inside the walls. Days passed. The fog never left. It pressed against the windows like it was alive, swirling in slow, deliberate circles. The house at the end of Briar Hollow Road stood as still as it ever had, watching, waiting. No one saw Elara Veras leave. No one saw her at all. It was her sister Camille who finally sent the police. 2 weeks without a single message, no texts, no calls. Camille knew her sister well enough to know that Elara wouldn't just disappear like that. The police didn't want to go. Probably just forgot to charge her phone, one officer muttered, tapping his notepad with his pen. People move out to the middle of nowhere and suddenly think they're mountain men. Happens all the time. But after enough calls from Camille, they drove out to Briar Hollow Road. The house looked exactly as it always had. Grey wood, sagging roof, fog curling around its edges like fingers. The path leading up to the porch was overgrown, but there was a fresh set of tire tracks in the dirt. "Car's still here," said Officer Rowan, pointing toward the old hatchback parked by the house. "She didn't leave. Then where is she?" asked Officer Mills, glancing at the upstairs window. He frowned, tilting his head. "Thought I saw something move." They climbed the steps. Rowan knocked. Knock, knock, knock. Silence. "Police!" Rowan called, peering through the window next to the door. He tapped on the glass with his flashlight. "Miss Veras, if you're home, we just want to check on you." Nothing. No footsteps, no movement. Just fog and silence. "Go round back," Rowan muttered, motioning to Mills. He reached for the doorknob and twisted it, unlocked. "Of course it is," he muttered to himself. Slowly, he pushed the door open. It creaked, long and slow, like it hadn't been touched in years. The smell hit him first. "Ugh," he grimaced, pulling his sleeve over his nose. Wet wood, damp air. Something else, something sharp and metallic. "Mills, you smell that?" "Yeah," Mills called from the back. "Smells like blood." Rowan froze in place. His eyes scanned the room slowly, carefully, his hand resting on the handle of his service weapon. His boots thudded softly on the wooden floor as he stepped inside. "Miss Veras?" he called out. No answer. He glanced at the living room. The couch was empty, the TV off, but there was something strange about the layout. The mattress was in the middle of the living room floor, like she'd been sleeping there. Next to it, he spotted the broken remains of a lamp, shards of porcelain scattered across the floor. "Hey, Mills, something's off," Rowan called over his shoulder. "Looks like she..." Tap, tap, tap! He spun around, hand on his holstered gun. "Mills?" No answer. The taps echoed again, soft, from under the floor. He took one slow step back toward the front door. His eyes scanned the floorboards. The house was old, sure, but that noise wasn't the groan of old wood. It was something else, something moving. He crouched slowly, eyes locked on the floor, listening. His fingers hovered over the cold, damp wood. "Don't touch it," his instinct screamed. "Don't you dare touch it." But he touched it. At first, nothing happened. But then under his fingertips, he felt it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks, from directly beneath his hand. He pulled back so fast he fell on his back. His breathing was wild, eyes darting across the floor. Someone was down there. He knew it now. No more guessing, no more. It's just the house settling. "Mills!" he barked, scrambling to his feet. "Mills, get in here!" No response. "Mills!" He ran for the back of the house, boots slamming on the wood. "Don't play games with me, man! Mills!" He turned the corner into the kitchen and stopped dead. The back door was wide open. Fog poured in, curling over the kitchen floor like smoke. Mills' flashlight lay on the ground, the beam flickering weakly, but there was no sign of Mills. "Jesus," Rowan muttered, slowly stepping toward the door. His breath fogged up in front of him. The cold was sharp now, like ice in his lungs. "Mills, if you're out there, say something, say anything." Nothing, just the fog. He knelt, picking up Mills' flashlight, his eyes darting to the tree line. No footprints, no sign of struggle. It was like Mills had been taken. Then he heard it. "Rowan." His breath caught in his throat. The voice was soft, distorted, like it was underwater. It came from behind him. Slowly, so slowly, he turned. The door to the basement was open. It hadn't been open before. He was sure of it. He was so sure of it. The basement. It yawned open like a mouth. The stairs led down into blackness, into air so thick it felt like syrup. No sound came from it. No draft. No echoes. Just a black hole waiting to be filled. He didn't move, didn't breathe, but something else did. A scraping sound echoed from below. He stepped back, every part of his body screaming to run. He turned, ready to bolt, but then something grabbed his ankle. Fingers, cold, thin fingers. He screamed, kicking at them, but the grip was like iron. His head hit the floor with a crack and pain exploded in his skull. His vision spun as he twisted, his hands clawing at the floor for something, anything to hold on to. The fingers pulled. He screamed louder than he ever had in his life. "No! No, please!" he howled, his nails scratching grooves into the floorboards. The fingers pulled harder. They weren't hands anymore. They were claws, wet and slick with something thick and warm. His body was halfway through the gap now. He kicked wildly, eyes filled with tears. Then he saw it, a face, no eyes, no nose, just a mouth. A wide, horrible mouth, filled with teeth that were too small and too sharp. It stared at him from below, its head tilted to the side, just like the figure from before. It smiled, and it whispered, just for him. "Come down, Rowan." He screamed as the floor swallowed him whole. The boards snapped back into place, clean and smooth, as if they'd never been lifted at all. The fog rolled in, curling around the edges of the broken door. It seeped inside, filling every corner, every crevice. The house on Briar Hollow went silent once more. No whispers, no taps, no knocks. But if you stand close to the house, close enough to press your ear to the wall, you might hear them. Not loud, just a faint sound. Tap, tap, tap. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear them call for you. Come down. I wonder, if they called for you, would you answer? That, my friend, is the story of Elara Veras and the whispers beneath the floorboards. The house claimed her, just as it claimed them all. They always do in the end. If you'd like me to add more details, expand certain scenes, or change anything, just say the word. But remember, some stories once told never stop whispering.